The Ukraine is trying to mess up the Sahel alliance. You know the war that is going on between Russia and Ukraine? It has now spilled over into Africa, and it is affecting the Sahel alliance between Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali. Recently, there was an attack, an ambush in Mali, the border between Mali and Algeria, where Tuareg militants ambushed and unalived took the lives of Mali troops and Russian Wagner troops in an ambush. And it has been alleged, and it hasn't been denied, that Ukraine gave intelligence and training and weapons to the militants who made that ambush happen. Based on all the information that I've told you about what has been going on in the Sahel, what has been going on with all these African nations trying to free themselves from neocolonialism, this is a very, very pivotal time. And I also told you how important it is, the relationship between African nations and Russia and China. So guys, everybody who's watching this video, go and sit down, get your drink, get your focus, because I am going to go step by step. I'm getting my board out, and I'm going to break down this situation to you piece by piece. I'm going to explain to you who the Tuareg are, what Ukraine is doing, what kind of games they're playing, what Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Chad, Sudan have to do, how Russia factors into this whole thing, and everything that you guys need to be aware of. Because this, guys, is all about true African history. And if you know your history, you will fully understand what is going on in the Sahel region. This is the Sahel region. You see all of that? This entire area is the Sahel region of Africa. The reason why Nigeria is even highlighted here is because of the importance that Nigeria has to the Sahel region. It is not necessarily part of the Sahel, but it is bordered with Niger, and it is a very, very important nation politically because Nigeria is ECOWAS. Okay, Nigeria is ECOWAS. We know who ECOWAS is because ECOWAS are essentially a control arm of the Western nations. So what happened here is Mali is bordered with Algeria, and so is Niger. This is typically where the Tuareg reside. And what the Tuareg, which are a nomadic group of Berbers who have existed in the North African hemisphere, let me just put that back, have existed in the North African hemisphere for, in fact, they go even as far as, let me get this better, because they go as far as Egypt, because they're nomadic. They've existed in the Sahel area for centuries. They go back to ancient Egypt. Get that clear. The Tuareg go way back to ancient Egypt. Okay? Because this is their area that they were in. You see Sudan, which used to be Upper Egypt, because the map is upside down. Sudan, this is where the Tuareg were residing. They were all over the place, all over these areas. Guys, I know that you're engaged. I know that this video is giving you some serious information, so I apologize to interrupt. Now, as you know, we've been dealing with a lot of censorship, a lot of situations where my videos and my material isn't able to get to you who have made the decision to subscribe or follow my channel. Due to algorithms and the powers that be, it is very difficult to get all the most pertinent material to my audience. I've had a newsletter for quite a while now, and you should all be signed up to it. You go right down to the description of this video and you can sign up to the Al-Kabolan newsletter and podcast. In addition to that, in the description, you will also see the True History of Africa Challenge, where I am going to be chronicling the true history of Africa from prehistoric times to the present day of every single African country, starting with 4 countries to begin with based on a poll, and we'll poll for the other ones. All right, guys, back to the transmission. Okay? Get that into your mind so you can understand what I'm going to tell you now. The Tuareg want autonomy. They're residing in these areas and they want autonomy. Okay? And they don't want to be part of the Nigerian government. They don't want to be part of the Mali government. They don't want to be part of the Algerian government. They don't want to be part of Chad, of Sudan. They want to be free to roam, controlling their own areas, doing what they want to do. Now, these countries that you see here are not African indigenous countries. These are countries that were created in the late 1800s during the scramble for Africa, the Berlin Conference. That is when all of these nations were created. So all of these nations like Niger, Chad, Sudan, these are not real nations. And in fact, Mali, even though Mali has existed as a kingdom for centuries, Mali extended beyond what you're seeing here. And it was a kingdom, not a country, in which the Tuareg were able to do whatever they wanted to do. So what the Tuareg have been fighting for is a thing called Azawad, which is their own homeland, which would exist in these regions that they would control. These governments of Niger and Mali do not want that to happen. They're like, no, we're not going to give you any Azawad. We are sovereign nations, and that's not going to happen. So this is the classic battle that the Tuareg have been having in these areas. Things changed. Things changed when a certain something happened. So in 2012, all of a sudden, there was an uptick in terrorism, Al-Qaeda and so forth. In 2012, okay, in these regions in Africa. And you ask yourself that, wait a minute, the Tuareg have been fighting for a long time, for decades, centuries over these things. They weren't employing terrorism, like they were just fighting for their sovereignty. What happened in 2012 that these guys have suddenly become a terrorist group who are now doing suicide bombing, kidnappings, and all of this sort of stuff? Well, what happened in 2011? Does anybody want to remind yourselves of what happened in 2011? In 2011, there was an insurrection in Libya where Muammar Gaddafi was murdered, he was taken out, and Libya was quote-unquote liberated by NATO. Oh, sorry about that, guys. By NATO and the United States and the UK and France. Okay? And what did they do? They created chaos in Libya. And a lot of those criminals who were they used the unrest as an opportunity to wreak havoc. They ended up fleeing into the Sahara and ended up combining with the Tuareg groups, infiltrating them, and causing havoc on the borders of Mali, Niger, Chad. Sudan has been hit hard by this, and obviously Burkina Faso, and so on and so forth. That is what these guys have now been fighting. Who caused this? NATO, US, UK, France. They caused this. They didn't do anything to fix it after they created chaos in Libya that led to the unrest that is happening in the borders. So, when you now look at that situation, and you fast forward to what is happening today, okay, with the Ukraine are at war with Russia. Guys, pay attention to what I'm going to tell you. V versus Russia. Now, Russia have been isolated from the Western Hemisphere and NATO, which is what Ukraine wants to be a part of, which is what caused the chaos. Russia, because they've been isolated, started doing partnerships in earnest with these countries, with the Sahel. Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, so on and so forth. And those countries have been giving Russia resources and trade in exchange for support militarily, technology, power, infrastructure, and so forth. Okay? The Ukraine's tactic has expanded beyond just the battleground in the east. But they are now attacking and supporting anybody that supports Russia. And where is that happening a lot of? In Mali, Niger, and the Sahel region. So Ukraine are now offering support to anybody who is attacking Russian interests in the Sahel. Guys, are you paying attention to what I'm telling you? This is tactical warfare on a global stage. The video you're watching now is to explain to you tactical warfare on a global stage. Screenshot this image. Burn it into your brains. I'm doing this. This is baby talk. I'm talking to you now. Baby talk. So anybody can understand what I'm saying. So Ukraine now realize that if we can squeeze these areas, cause chaos, that is going to reduce the amount of resources that they're able to supply Ukraine's enemy Russia with, and that will cause the sanctions that the West is applying on Russia to have a more profound impact. That is what this is about. So the question you've got to ask yourself is that, do you believe that Ukraine is acting on its own in the Sahel region? Do you believe that? Or, which is what my belief is, Ukraine is acting on behalf of NATO, which is the United States, France, UK, and Germany. Guys, this is real talk. Do you really believe that what Ukraine is doing has nothing to do with the fact that France and the UK, well, the UK is a separate thing because they are just really connected to this whole business, but France and the US have lost ground in Mali, Niger, and Chad, and Burkina Faso, and so forth? Because if you remember, General Tiani said, USA, we don't want you in Niger, get out. Mali, we don't want France in Mali, we don't want the USA, get out. And they welcomed Russia into the Sahel via a group that I've told you called Wagner. The Wagner group are a Russian paramilitary group which are not officially part of the Russian government, but everybody knows that they're operating on behalf of the Russian government in Africa. But what it provides them, because they are mercenaries, is plausible deniability. Plausible deniability means that if they do anything messed up in Africa, it is not on the Russian government because they are private. They're not the Russian government. Some people are saying that why don't these African nations invite the official Russian army into Africa? I know the reason why is that then you have less control over the transaction. When it's just a private deal that you're doing with somebody, you can just say, listen, we pay you X, you give us the support that we want you to give us, boom, 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 da, 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 da. The second you bring in an official country's army into your nation, you've got watchdogs, you've got like UN, NATO, all of these guys breathing down your neck, G7, everybody is in your business. You've got to go through parliament, you've got to go through all of these sort of things. You don't want to have to do that. Now, a lot of guys who criticize this will try and say that, Africa, why are you using mercenaries? These people are doing crimes against humanity in Africa, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to put another name on the board. I'm going to put another name on the board. You remember a man called Eric Prince, who said that the West should recolonize Africa? I'm going to put another name on the board. And you guys tell me if you know what this name is. Do you know what that is? Blackwater? Blackwater is an American paramilitary group that is exactly the same as Wagner, but they operate on behalf of the CIA in Africa. And the difference between Blackwater and Wagner is that Blackwater answer to their foreign masters. They don't answer to an African government. African governments do not hire Blackwater in Africa. They are hired by foreign interests, because Eric Prince started Blackwater after the Rwanda genocide to protect the interests of foreigners in Africa. So who would you rather have? The people who the African governments are hiring themselves for their interests, or a group that is on African soil providing support for the interests of foreigners? When Blackwater were in Africa, America has nothing to say about them. The UK has nothing to say about them. France has nothing to say about. Oh, that's fine. All the people trolling you on social media have nothing to say about Blackwater. Oh, you've got to be really careful about them in Africa. You know, these people they're crimes against you. What about Blackwater? Who've been taking resources and money and all this sort of stuff out of Africa for decades. Nobody's got anything to say about that, let alone what Eric Prince is now doing in Africa. Think about that. So, when you look at what is happening in the Sahel region, guys, this is very, very simple. This is tactical destabilization. Because the West were kicked out of the Sahel, they needed to create enough unrest that will force certain things to happen. Pay attention to this. This is the last thing I'm going to say in this video. Pay attention to this. The USA, France were kicked out of Niger, Mali, okay? And then Russia were welcomed in. Okay. Now, quite simply, the United States and France cannot, let me move this again because I'm actually covering. The United States and France now had a problem because so much of their resources, especially for France, come from these nations. Gold, uranium, and so on and so forth. But now these nations are trading directly with Russia in exchange for infrastructure, like I said. So because the USA and France don't respect these African nations, like they don't treat them with reciprocity, those African nations have no reason to work with them anymore, because now this is where it gets interesting. Because the terrorist activity that was happening on the borders of these African nations is the validation for those nations putting their military bases and their forces into those countries, saying that they were going to be dealing with the security threats and the terrorism threats, the Tuareg and so on and so forth. But in all these decades and all these years, they have not solved those issues. So what are you getting out of it? And you're giving these guys resources at these ridiculous prices. You're in debt. They're giving you loans that you can't pay off, and so on and so forth. Those countries, in my humble opinion, instead of trying to do battle fairly with Russia in terms of offering better deals to Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, Guinea, Chad, Sudan, all of these sort of places, instead of doing that, they are, in my opinion, allowing the Ukraine to act as a proxy to destabilize the Sahel region by supplying these people with intel and causing that kind of chaos that the Ukraine is doing. What they do is that they destabilize the Sahel region so that they are forcing the USA to come back and the French to come back in as a tactical move, because they cannot do it themselves. So I've said this, but you have to get that into your minds, that because they cannot do it themselves, they're using the Ukraine as a proxy for their tactics. But the Ukraine are being very foolish it's an allegation, but they've not denied that they did this. But they're being very foolish because if things go south and this doesn't work, and Russia, which is going to win in that conflict that they have, you've essentially isolated yourself from Africa. You've isolated yourself. And the USA and France aren't going to help you in the future when you're isolated from resources and trade with these African nations, when Russia and BRICS, for those who know about BRICS, gets itself into play and forms an alternative to the Western G7. You see, the thing is, the Sahel alliance is very dangerous to the Western Hemisphere because it is an alternative to ECOWAS, and it is independent. They're not beholden to the US and France and UK and so on. And they're connected to Russia and China. The idea with all of this, in my view, is just to destabilize that region so the Sahel alliance doesn't function. That is what I believe is going on.